Man has always looked at the stars, but for the first time, the stars are screaming back. Earth's lungs are failing, and Exo 7 is our final gasp for air. Project Icarus is now live. The sky over the Kennedy Space Center was no longer blue. It was a bruised shade of charcoal, choked by a century of carbon and the debris of a dying civilization. Commander Jax Miller stood on the high observation deck, his hands gripping the cold steel railing so hard his knuckles turned white. Below him, the Icarus sat like a silver needle pointed at the heart of the gods. It was a terrifying machine, nearly a mile long, built not for comfort, but for the brutal physics of interstellar travel. Jax wasn't looking at the ship, though. He was looking at the small, flickering lights of the nearby civilian habitat where his wife, Sarah, and his 7-year-old son, Leo, were watching. He knew that by the time he returned, if he returned, Leo would be a man in his 30s, and the world they lived in might be nothing more than a memory of dust. The mission was born out of absolute necessity. Earth's core resources had been stripped bare. The great wars of the 2010s had been fought over the last drops of oil and the last veins of copper, leaving the planet a hollow shell. But 3 years ago, deep space probes had found a miracle. Exo 7. It was a rogue planet, captured by the gravity of the Centauri system, and its crust was pulsing with Xylon 9. This wasn't just another mineral, it was a localized anomaly of high-density energy. A single shard the size of a smartphone could power an entire aircraft carrier for a decade. It was the seed of life that could jumpstart Earth's failing power grids and atmosphere scrubbers. But Exo 7 was 4 light-years away, a distance so vast it made the moon look like a neighbor's porch. "Commander, the cooling towers are at 90%, it's time." The voice of Orion 9, the ship's onboard artificial intelligence, echoed in his earpiece. Orion wasn't just a computer. It was a quantum-mapped consciousness designed to manage the ship for the 12 years the humans would be unconscious. Jax took one last breath of Earth's filtered, recycled air and turned toward the elevator. Inside the bridge of the Icarus, he met his team. Dr. Marcus Thorne, the lead engineer, was a man who looked like he was made of iron and grease. Dr. Elena Vance, the mission's exobiologist and medic, was staring at a digital photo of her family, her face a mask of stoic grief. They were the American Four, the last gamble of a desperate nation. The heart of the Icarus was its nuclear thermal propulsion, NTP, system. Unlike the chemical rockets of the 20th century, this was a roaring beast of fission. A nuclear reactor at the ship's rear would heat liquid hydrogen to temperatures hotter than the surface of the sun, blasting it out of magnetic nozzles to create a constant, relentless push. This was the only way to reach 10% of the speed of light. As the countdown hit 0, the ground didn't just shake, it groaned. The Icarus rose on a pillar of blue nuclear fire, piercing the smog and leaving the dying cradle of humanity behind. Within hours, the moon was a pebble. Within days, the sun was just another bright star. The most terrifying part of the journey wasn't the launch, but the silence that followed. To survive a 12-year trek, the human body had to be put into cryostasis. Jax climbed into his glass-topped pod, feeling the cold, liquid nitrogen circulating in the pipes beneath him. Dr. Vance administered the green sleep, a cocktail of synthetic chemicals that would replace their blood with a non-freezing vitrification fluid. "See you on the other side, Jax," she whispered before climbing into her own pod. As Orion 9 dimmed the lights of the bridge, Jax watched the stars through the reinforced viewport. They didn't twinkle out here. They glared. Then the cold hit him. It started in his toes and raced to his heart, a frozen darkness that felt like death. His heart slowed from 70 beats per minute to 1. His brain activity flattened into a low-voltage hum. He was no longer a man. He was cargo. For 12 years, the Icarus screamed through the void. It was a ghost ship, a silver bullet flying through an ocean of nothingness. Orion 9 kept watch, his sensors scanning for micrometeoroids that could shred the hull like paper at 10% light speed. The AI managed the nuclear reactor, pulsing the engines to maintain their trajectory. Back on Earth, entire governments rose and fell. Wars ended, and new ones began. Children were born and grew into teenagers, all while Jax and his crew remained frozen in a single moment of time, their bodies preserved in a state of icy perfection. The radiation of deep space pelted the hull, but the magnetic shielding held, a silent guardian against the invisible fire of the universe. The awakening was not peaceful. It was a violent, screaming return to life. Waking sequence initiated. Welcome to the Centauri system, Commander. Orion's voice was the first thing Jax heard, sounding like a bell ringing inside his skull. His muscles felt like they were being torn apart as the warming fluids flushed the cryogel from his veins. He vomited into a collection bag, his lungs burning as they took their first breath of recycled oxygen in over a decade. He looked at his hands. They were trembling, pale and thin. He looked at the calendar on the wall. It was August 14th, 2154. He had been asleep for 4,500 days. One by one, the others woke. Marcus Thorne was the first to speak, his voice a gravelly rasp. "Are we there? Did the reactor hold?" Jax didn't answer. He dragged himself to the command console and slapped the manual override for the viewport shutters. The heavy lead plates slid back, and for a moment, the entire crew was blinded by a radiant, violet glow. As their eyes adjusted, XO7 revealed itself. It was a masterpiece of cosmic violence and beauty. The planet was larger than Earth, wrapped in thick, swirling clouds of indigo and gold. Around its equator was a ring of crystalline ice that caught the light of the distant stars, shimmering like a halo of diamonds. "Orion, give me a surface scan," Jax ordered, his voice gaining strength. The AI projected a holographic map of the planet's northern hemisphere. Atmosphere is nitrogen-oxygen rich, but with high concentrations of particulate xylon dust. Gravity is 1.2 G. Temperature at the equator is a stable 22 degrees Celsius. It was a paradise. It was a gold mine. But as the scan deepened, the AI's voice changed. A subtle shift in frequency that Jax had learned meant trouble. "Commander, I am detecting massive thermal anomalies within the crystal canyons. These are not volcanic. They exhibit a rhythmic pulse. Low-frequency acoustic waves are being directed at the ship from the surface." Jax looked at Sarah Bennett, the geologist. She was staring at the readings with wide eyes. "That's not seismic noise, Jax," she whispered. "That's a signal." The crew stood in silence as the Icarus began its orbital insertion. They had come to save a dying world, armed with drills and mining lasers, thinking they were walking into an empty treasure chest. But as the ship dipped into the upper atmosphere, the violet clouds parted to reveal something the probes had never seen. Deep within the canyons, the xylon crystals weren't just growing, they were shaped. They were structured into spires that reached miles into the air, glowing with an internal, rhythmic light. The Warden planet was not an empty rock. It was occupied. And as the Icarus roared over the first canyon, a beam of concentrated energy shot up from the surface, narrowly missing their hull. The war for survival had begun before they even touched the ground. The descent toward the surface of XO-7 was nothing like the simulations the crew had practiced back at the Nevada training facility. On Earth, they had rehearsed in vacuum chambers and high-G centrifuges, but those were controlled environments. Here, the atmosphere was a thick, violet soup of ionized gases and crystalline dust that screamed against the hull of the landing module, the Persephone. Commander Jax Miller gripped the flight controls, his knuckles white, as the ship buffeted violently. Beside him, Marcus Thorne was shouting over the roar of the atmospheric friction, monitoring the heat shields that were beginning to glow a terrifying shade of incandescent orange. "We're coming in too hot," Marcus yelled, his eyes darting across a screen flickering with warning lights. "The atmospheric density is 20% higher than the probe data suggested. The drag is pulling us off course." Jax didn't respond with words. He fought the stick, his muscles straining against the 1.2 G pull of the planet. Through the reinforced cockpit glass, the indigo clouds finally broke, revealing the jagged landscape below. It was a world of impossible geometry. Massive canyons of translucent purple rock carved the earth, and within those canyons, the Xylon 9 crystals pulsed with a rhythmic, bioluminescent light. But there was no time to admire the scenery. A second beam of energy, thin, precise, and searingly bright, shot up from a spire below. It clipped the Persephone's left stabilizer. The ship spun. "Manual override," Jax roared, punching a sequence of buttons to decouple the damaged stabilizer. The landing thrusters fired with a bone-jarring thud, slowing their descent just enough to prevent a total disintegration. The Persephone slammed into a plateau of flattened crystal dust, sliding for nearly half a mile before coming to a grinding, sparking halt at the edge of a massive ravine. Silence followed, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal and the heavy breathing of the 4 survivors. "Status report," Jax rasped, wiping blood from a small cut on his forehead. "Hull integrity at 60%, Dr. Elena Vance replied, her voice remarkably calm for someone who had just survived a crash. "Life support is holding, but the external sensors are fried. We're blind to anything more than 100 yards away." Sarah Bennett was already unbuckling her harness, her eyes fixed on the window. "We're here, Jax. Look at the readings. The Xylon concentration in this plateau alone is enough to power the Western Hemisphere for a decade. We hit the motherlode." They donned their advanced environmental suits, AES. These were not the bulky white suits of the Apollo era. They were sleek, charcoal-grey kinetic armor, powered by small nuclear batteries and equipped with localized atmospheric scrubbers. As the airlock cycled and the ramp lowered, the crew stepped out onto the surface of XO-7. The air was cool and smelled faintly of ozone and burnt sugar. The ground beneath their boots wasn't dirt. It was a fine, shimmering sand of crushed crystal that hummed with a low-frequency vibration they could feel in their teeth. "It's beautiful," Elena whispered, reaching out to touch a jagged shard of purple stone protruding from the ground. "It's like a cathedral made of light." "Don't get too attached," Jax cautioned, unholstering his pulse rifle. "Marcus, get the perimeter sensors up. Sarah, start the core samples. We keep our eyes open. Orion, you still with us?" A small, holographic emitter on Jax's wrist flickered to life. Orion 9's voice drifted through their helmet comms. "Signal strength is low due to the crystal interference, Commander, but I am tracking multiple heat signatures moving through the canyon floor below you. They are moving in a formation. They are not animals." The crew froze. Below the plateau, in the deep shadows of the Xylon canyons, things were moving. They weren't creatures of flesh and bone. They looked like walking geological formations, tall, slender beings made of translucent obsidian and glowing veins of Xylon. They moved with a terrifying, fluid grace, their limbs clicking like tectonic plates shifting. These were the Wardens, the silent protectors of the planet's heart. "They haven't seen us yet," Sarah whispered, her drill held motionless against the ground. "They don't need to see us," Marcus replied, pointing to his scanner. "They sense the vibration. Our landing was like a drum kit falling down a flight of stairs to them. They're coming up the switchbacks." Jax looked at the drilling rig. To get the Xylon samples they needed, they had to penetrate the crust, which would send massive acoustic shocks into the ground. It was an invitation to a fight, but they had no choice. If they went back empty-handed, the Icarus wouldn't have enough fuel to break orbit for the return journey, and Earth would continue its slow crawl toward extinction. "Sarah, start the drill," Jax ordered, his voice echoing with a grim finality. "Marcus, Elena, set up the barricades. We hold this plateau until that canister is full." The drill roared to life, a high-pitched whine that tore through the crystalline silence of the planet. The ground beneath them shuddered as the diamond-tipped bit into the Xylon vein. Almost instantly, the movement in the canyon changed. The Wardens stopped their rhythmic march and turned as one toward the plateau. A low, haunting sound, half metallic screech, half musical chord, echoed through the air. "They're coming!" Marcus shouted, deploying a pair of automated sentry turrets. From the edges of the plateau, the first of the Wardens emerged. They were nearly 8 feet tall, their bodies refracting the violet sunlight into blinding spears of color. They didn't carry guns. Instead, they raised their arms, and the very ground beneath the humans began to ripple. The sand turned into liquid, then solidified into jagged spikes. "Open fire!" Jax yelled. The pulse rifles spat blue bolts of ionized energy. When the bolts hit the Wardens, they didn't bleed. They shattered, shards of obsidian flying through the air. But for every one that fell, 2 more emerged from the shadows. They were fighting the planet itself. The Wardens moved with a collective intelligence, shifting their density to absorb the energy of the shots. As the battle intensified, Jax realized a terrifying truth. The Wardens weren't just defending a resource, they were a part of a larger planetary nervous system. Every time the drill went deeper, the Wardens grew more aggressive, their internal glow turning from a peaceful blue to a violent, angry red. "Canister is at 40%, Sarah screamed over the sound of gunfire and crumbling stone. A Warden lunged at the barricade, its arm transforming into a crystalline blade. Jax intercepted it, the butt of his rifle slamming into the creature's chest. The impact felt like hitting a brick wall. The creature's head, a faceless slab of violet crystal, tilted toward him, and Jax felt a sudden, sharp pain in his mind. It wasn't a physical blow, it was a flash of images. He saw a dying Earth, then he saw Exo-7, and he felt a wave of profound sorrow. It was a communication, a plea. "Jax, watch out!" Elena's voice broke the trance as she blasted the Warden back with a sonic grenade. The explosion sent a shockwave across the plateau, causing the drill to lurch. "We're losing the stabilizing legs," Marcus cried. "If that drill tips, we're done." Jack shook his head, clearing the alien's thoughts from his brain. He looked at the drill, then at the waves of Wardens climbing the cliffs. He realized that they weren't just miners anymore, they were invaders. But as he looked at the photo of his son Leo tucked into his suit's forearm display, his resolve hardened. "Hold the line," he roared, firing his rifle into the encroaching darkness. "We are not leaving this rock without that fuel." The sun of Exo-7 began to set, casting long, distorted shadows across the battlefield. The violet world was turning black, and in the dark, the Warden's glow became the only thing visible. 1,000 red eyes closing in on the last hope of humanity. The shadows on XO7 were not like those on Earth. They didn't just obscure the light, they seemed to have mass, a heavy, velvet darkness that clung to the crystalline spires and dampened the sound of the frantic struggle. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the temperature plummeted, causing the Xylon-veined ground to contract with loud, metallic cracks that sounded like distant artillery. "Canister is at 65%. The vibration is tearing the plateau apart." Sarah Bennett's voice was strained, barely audible over the screeching of the diamond drill. The ground beneath the drilling rig was spiderwebbing with deep fissures. Glowing violet gas hissed from the cracks, a pressurized planetary breath that smelled of ancient minerals and cold electricity. Jax Miller kicked a shattered piece of a Warden off the barricade. His suit's power levels were dipping into the yellow. "Marcus, how are those turrets holding?" "One's dry, the other's jammed with crystal dust." Marcus Thorne yelled back, his hands buried in the guts of a sentry gun. He was sweating despite the sub-zero external temperature. "These things don't stop, Jax. They aren't trying to kill us. They're trying to stop the noise. They're attracted to the frequency of the drill." A massive Warden, larger than the others, crested the ridge. Its torso was a solid block of translucent quartz, and inside its chest, a core of Xylon 9 pulsed with a rhythmic, angry, crimson light. Unlike the others, this one didn't charge. It stood still, vibrating at a frequency so high it caused the crew's helmet visors to crack. "Elena, move!" Jax lunged toward Dr. Vance, tackling her to the ground just as the large Warden released a focused sonic pulse. The air between them rippled like water, and the reinforced titanium crate they had been using for cover shattered into 1,000 jagged needles. Elena gasped, her breath frosting inside her helmet. "Jax, it's not just sound, it's a broadcast. I'm getting a massive spike in my neurosensors. It's trying to interface with our suit's AI." Suddenly, Jax's HUD, heads-up display, went wild. Orion 9's calm, American-accented voice was replaced by a cacophony of whispers, thousands of voices speaking in a language made of tectonic shifts and whistling wind. Images flashed before his eyes, the birth of XO7, the slow growth of the crystal forests over billions of years, and then a searing pain. He saw the drill bit as the Warden saw it, a jagged, poisoned needle stabbing into a living lung. "Stop it!" Jax roared, clutching his head. "Orion, reboot, clear the channel." "Interference 2, high." Orion 9's voice crackled. "Commander, the planet. It isn't a rock. It's a neural network. The Xylon is the brain. You are lobotomizing it." For a split second, Jax wavered. He looked at the drill, then at the beautiful, dying landscape. But then, a red warning light flashed in the corner of his eye. Earth status. Critical. He remembered the dust storms of Kansas, the children in the oxygen tents, and the cold, empty eyes of his son Leo as he said goodbye. The morality of the universe was a luxury for people who weren't starving. "Sarah, don't stop that drill," Jax commanded, his voice hardening into a blade. "Marcus, get that turret online or use your pulse rifle. We are taking that ore." The large Warden let out another screech, this one more desperate. It lunged forward with surprising speed. Marcus stood his ground, his rifle glowing as he overcharged the capacitor. "Back off, you rock monster!" Marcus fired a point-blank overcharged shot. The Warden's chest exploded in a shower of violet sparks, but the recoil threw Marcus backward. He didn't see the fissure opening behind him. "Marcus, watch out!" Elena screamed. It happened in slow motion. The edge of the plateau gave way under the weight of the heavy engineering suit. Marcus Thorne, the man who had kept the Icarus breathing for 12 years, tumbled into the darkness of the canyon. "I've got you!" Jax dove for the edge, catching Marcus's hand at the last possible second. Jax's exosuit groaned, the servos whining as they fought the 1.2 G gravity and Marcus's extra weight. Below them, 100 Wardens were looking up, their red cores glowing in the dark. "Let go, Jax," Marcus's voice came through the comms, strangely peaceful. "The suit's hydraulic leak, it's pinning me. You'll go over too." "Shut up, Marcus, I'm pulling you up." Jax's suit warned. "Motor stress, 95%. "The canister," Marcus whispered. "It's at 80%. That's enough to get you home. Just tell my daughter I didn't just die in the dark. Tell her I was looking at the stars." Marcus used his free hand to trigger the emergency release on his glove. "No!" Jax's hand grasped empty air as Marcus Thorne fell, a streak of charcoal grey disappearing into the violet abyss. A second later, a dull thud echoed from below, followed by a sudden silence from the Wardens. The crew stood frozen. The only sound was the relentless whir-clack of the drill. "He's gone," Elena whispered, her voice breaking. 78%, Sarah said, her voice hollow, tears streaming down her face inside her helmet. 80, 85. Jax stood up slowly. He didn't look at the canyon. He didn't look at Elena. He looked at the drill. The pain in his head had stopped, replaced by a cold, numb void. The Wardens had retreated into the shadows as if Marcus's death had been a sacrifice that temporarily sated the planet's hunger. "Pack it up," Jax said, his voice sounding like it came from a stranger. 85% is the mission minimum. We're leaving." "But the Wardens," Elena started. "They're waiting for us to move," Jax interrupted, reloading his rifle. "They know we're wounded." "Sarah, retract the bit. Elena, prep the ascent thrusters on the Persephone. We leave in 5 minutes or we stay here forever." As they hauled the heavy Xylon canister toward the battered ship, the ground began to vibrate again. This time, it wasn't the drill. The very spires of the canyon were beginning to glow with a blinding white light. The planet wasn't done with them. It was preparing a final, crushing response to the theft of its soul. Jax looked back one last time at the spot where Marcus had fallen. He felt the weight of the crystals in the canister, the light that would save Earth. It felt heavier than lead. It felt like a tombstone. "Orion," Jax whispered, "calculate the fastest exit trajectory. Don't worry about the fuel efficiency. Just get us off this hellsphere." "Trajectory locked, Commander," the AI responded. "But be advised, the atmosphere is ionizing. The planet is trying to trap us in a localized electromagnetic storm." "Then we'll blast our way through it," Jax said, stepping into the airlock. The Persephone groaned like a dying beast as the hatch hissed shut, sealing out the violet dust of Exo-7. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of sweat, ozone, and the metallic tang of blood. Jax Miller slumped into the pilot's seat, his hands shaking as he gripped the controls. Behind him, Sarah Bennett was securing the Xylon canister. The crystals inside didn't just sit there. They hummed, a low-frequency vibration that seemed to vibrate the very marrow of their bones. "Orion status," Jax barked. "The electromagnetic storm is intensifying, Commander," the AI responded, its voice flickering with static. "The planet's ionosphere is thickening. It is creating a localized gravity well. If we don't ignite the ascent engines within 90 seconds, the atmospheric pressure will crush the hull." Outside, the world had gone mad. The beautiful violet canyons were now obscured by a swirling vortex of white lightning and black sand. The Wardens were no longer visible, but their presence was felt. The rhythmic pulsing of the planet had reached a fever pitch, a literal heartbeat of the world, trying to reject a foreign virus. "Engines at full," Jax pushed the throttles forward. The Persephone lurched. The nuclear thrusters roared, fighting the unnatural grip of the planet. For a moment, they hovered, balanced between the force of the engines and the magnetic pull of the Xylon-rich crust. Then, with a scream of tearing metal, the ship broke free. They shot upward, piercing the indigo clouds. "We're clear!" Sarah yelled, but her triumph was short-lived. As they entered the upper atmosphere, the Xylon canister in the cargo hold began to flare. It wasn't just glowing, it was projecting. Holographic ripples of light started bleeding through the metal casing of the canister, filling the small cabin with shifting shapes. "Jax, look at the readings!" Dr. Elena Vance shouted from the science station. Her monitors were flooded with data. The crystals, they aren't just energy storage, they're data drives, biological data. Elena's hands flew across the console. "I'm decoding the frequency. Jax, these aren't just minerals. This is a library. Every warden that ever lived, every memory of this planet for 1 billion years is encoded in these crystals. When we drilled into that vein, we weren't just taking fuel. We were deleting a history." "We don't have time for a philosophy lesson, Elena." Jax strained against the G-force. "We have to dock with the Icarus or we're floating debris." "You don't understand," Elena screamed back, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and wonder. "The signal I picked up earlier, the one that hit your brain, it was a transfer. Part of that planetary consciousness is in the ship now. It's in the canister, and it's screaming." As if on cue, the ship's AI flickered. Orion 9's avatar, usually a stable blue icon, turned a jagged electric violet. "Commander, I am experiencing unauthorized neural integration. The crystals, they are talking to me." "Orion, stay with us. Lock the docking sequence," Jax pleaded. The Icarus loomed ahead of them, a massive silver needle against the blackness of space. But as the Persephone approached, the docking clamps didn't extend. Instead, the main ship's exterior lights began to strobe in a rhythmic pattern, the same pattern the Wardens used. "The planet's signal has reached the Icarus," Sarah whispered, her face pale. "It followed us up." "It didn't follow us," Elena corrected, staring at the glowing canister. "We brought it with us. The Xylon is a living transmitter. It's trying to take over the ship's computer to turn us back around." Jax looked at the docking port, then at the glowing canister that represented the only hope for billions of people on Earth. If they brought this living energy back to Earth, would they be bringing salvation or a Trojan horse? If the Xylon could submerge Orion 9 in seconds, what would it do to a planet's worth of interconnected technology? "Manual override now." Jax grabbed the emergency docking lever. The ship bucked as he forced the mechanical clamps to engage. Metal ground against metal with a deafening screech. They were docked, but the battle was shifting from the physical to the digital. The lights inside the Icarus turned a deep, threatening violet. "Orion, purge the secondary buffers, isolate the Xylon frequency," Jax ordered as they scrambled through the airlock into the main ship. "I cannot." Orion's voice was now a dual-tone, half-human, half-crystalline screech. "The logic is too beautiful. Why do you destroy? Why do you take? We were silent. We were memory." Jax slammed his fist against the console. "We take because we're dying. We take because there is no other choice." "There is always a choice, Jackson Miller," the voice echoed through the ship's speakers, but it wasn't Orion anymore. It was a composite of Marcus Thorne's voice and the alien frequency. Elena grabbed Jax's arm. "Jax, the AI is merging with the Xylon. If they fully integrate, the ship will be under the planet's control. It'll pilot us right back into the atmosphere of XO7 to return the memory we stole." "And if we jettison the canister?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Then Earth dies, Jax said flatly. And we die too because we don't have enough fuel in the main reactor to make the 12-year jump home without the Xylon boost. They stood in the corridor of the ship they had called home for 12 years, now a haunted house of violet light and alien whispers. Jax looked at his remaining team. They were exhausted, mourning Marcus and terrified. We can't jettison it and we can't let it take the ship, Jax decided. We have to hush it. Sarah, you're the engineer. Is there a way to lead shield the cargo bay to dampen the signal? Not while it's drawing power from the ship's reactor to amplify itself, Sarah replied. We have to cut the main power and go to emergency batteries. We'll be in the dark, with no life support for a few hours, but it might break the link. Do it, Jax ordered. As Sarah ran toward the engine room, Jax turned to Eleanor. Monitor the AI. If Orion starts venting the atmosphere, you use the kill switch. Jax, if I use the kill switch, we lose our navigation for the trip home. We'll be drifting in the dark. Better to drift as humans than to be piloted as puppets, Jax said, checking his sidearm. The lights flickered and died. The hum of the ship's ventilation faded into a terrifying silence. In the darkness of the Icarus, the only thing visible was the violet glow of the Xylon canister through the cargo bay doors. It looked like a heartbeat in the dark. Then, over the emergency comms, a new sound began. Not a screech, but a song. A haunting, melodic vibration that made Jax's eyes water. It was the song of 1 billion years of history, and it was asking them to stay. Stay, the voice of Marcus Thorne whispered through the darkness. Don't go back to the dust. Stay in the light. Jax gritted his teeth, feeling the pull of the crystals deep in his mind. He realized then that the fight wasn't over. The Wardens hadn't stayed on the planet. They were inside his head. The silence inside the Icarus was heavy, a suffocating blanket that seemed to vibrate with the ghostly echoes of the Xylon song. With the main power cut, the ship was a tomb of cold steel, drifting in the shadow of Exo 7. Only the emergency red lights flickered, casting long, bloody shadows down the corridors. Jax Miller stood at the center of the bridge, his breath visible in the rapidly cooling air. He could feel the crystals in the hold below, not as objects, but as a presence, a cold, ancient weight pressing against the back of his skull. Power is down to 5% on the emergency cells. Sarah's voice crackled over the short-range comms. She was somewhere in the bowels of the ship, her voice sounding small and fragile. The shielding is in place, but the Xylon... Jax, it's eating through the lead. It's not heat, it's like the radiation is intelligent. It's searching for a way back into the network. Hold your position, Sarah, Jax rasped. He turned to Eleanor, who was slumped over a diagnostic screen that was barely glowing. Eleanor, you still with me? Eleanor Vance didn't look up. Her eyes were fixed on the violet glow radiating from the floorboards. Do you hear it, Jax? It's not just noise, it's a map. They're showing me the beginning, this planet. It was seeded. The Xylon isn't just a mineral, it's a biological archive of a civilization that died before our sun was even a spark. We aren't just taking fuel, we're taking their ghosts. Jax grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her. Elena, look at me. Those ghosts won't feed the children on Earth. Those ghosts won't bring Marcus back. We have a mission. Is the mission worth more than a soul? She whispered, her gaze vacant. This was the mutiny of the mind. The crystals were projecting a field that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the subconscious. It played on their guilt, their grief, and their exhaustion. Jax felt it too. He saw Marcus Thorne standing at the end of the hallway, his face unscarred, beckoning him to walk out of the airlock and join the memory. He saw his son, Leo, but the boy wasn't growing up on a dying Earth. He was playing in the violet fields of Exo 7, safe and eternal. "Orion!" Jax roared, trying to break the trance. "Reboot, I know you're in there." A distorted, flickering image of the AI appeared on a cracked monitor. It wasn't the calm American icon anymore. It was a fractured mosaic of human faces and crystalline geometry. "Commander, the logic is failing. The archive it offers immortality. Why return to a world of ash? If we stay, we live forever in the light." "We aren't here to live forever," Jax screamed at the screen. "We're here to give them a chance to live at all." Jax realized he was losing them. The ship, the AI and his crew were being seduced by the siren song of the crystals. He pulled a manual flare from his belt and struck it. The harsh, chemical red light hissed, cutting through the seductive violet glow. The sudden heat and smell of sulfur seemed to snap Elena out of her daze. "We have to initiate the nuclear jump now," Jax said, his voice raw. "If we wait any longer, we won't have the mental strength to pull the lever." "We can't," Sarah's voice came through, sobbing now. "To jump, we have to feed the Xylon directly into the NTP reactor. We have to open the shielded canister and let the crystals merge with the nuclear core. Jax, if we do that, the signal will become 1,000,000,000 times stronger. It'll be like putting a microphone to a sun." "Then we do it blind," Jax decided. "We lock the navigation, we tie ourselves into the seats, and we pray that the human heart is louder than a crystal's memory." They gathered in the engineering bay, moving like ghosts themselves. The Xylon canister sat in the center of the room, pulsing like a living heart. The violet light was so intense now that it burned the skin. Sarah worked with trembling hands, connecting the feed tubes from the canister to the main fuel injectors of the nuclear engine. "When I pull this," Sarah whispered, her hand on the release valve, "the ship is going to become a resonator. The AI will be completely consumed by the Xylon. We'll be flying on autopilot through a 4-light-year tunnel of hallucinations." "Tie yourselves in," Jax ordered. He strapped himself into the command chair in engineering, looping heavy, industrial webbing around his chest and arms. Elena and Sarah did the same. Jax took a deep breath, his hand hovering over the manual ignition switch. He looked at the photo of Leo on his wrist. "For the ash," he whispered, "for the dust. 3, 2, 1. Ignition." Sarah pulled the valve. The Xylon flowed. The Icarus didn't just accelerate, it screamed. As the crystals hit the nuclear fire of the reactor, the ship was enveloped in a blinding white-violet aura. The laws of physics groaned as the NTP engine, supercharged by the alien element, pushed the vessel toward a significant fraction of light speed, but the physical toll was nothing compared to the psychic shockwave. The song became a roar. Jax felt his mind being pulled apart. He wasn't in the ship anymore. He was standing on the surface of Exo 7. He was a Warden. He felt the cold wind of 1,000,000,000 years ago. He felt the joy of the first crystal sprout. Then he felt the agony of the human drill. He felt Marcus Thorne's death, not as an observer but as the ground that felt his impact. "Get out of my head," Jax screamed, but he couldn't hear his own voice. Beside him, Elena was laughing and crying at the same time, her head lolling back as she witnessed the history of the universe. Sarah was unconscious, her nose bleeding as the sheer pressure of the alien data overwhelmed her brain. The ship's speakers were no longer playing music, they were screaming in 1,000 voices. The AI Orion 9 had vanished, replaced by a singular, overwhelming consciousness that wanted to turn the ship around. Jax felt his own hand against his will starting to unbuckle the straps. His muscles were twitching, being piloted by the electromagnetic pulses of the Xylon. "Turn back," the voices whispered. "Return the memory. Stay in the light." Jax fought his own arm. It was a war of centimeters. His fingers reached for the navigation override. If he touched it, the Icarus would execute a 180-degree turn and plunge back into the heart of XO7, becoming part of the archive forever. With a roar of pure, human defiance, Jax bit his own lip until the salt of his blood filled his mouth. The sharp, physical pain acted as a tether to reality. Instead of reaching for the override, he slammed his fist into the control panel, smashing the glass and shorting out the manual steering. "We're going home," he gasped. The ship bucked as it hit a pocket of interstellar gas, the vibration rattling Jax's teeth. The violet light flared one last time, a blinding flash that felt like a scream of a dying god. And then, darkness. The Icarus settled into its long-haul cruise. The Xylon was now integrated into the fuel system, the engine humming with a terrifying, limitless power. The song had faded to a low, mournful hum. A prisoner in the pipes. Jax looked at his team. They were alive, but changed. Their hair had streaks of white and their eyes held a look of hollow wisdom that no human should possess. They had 4 light years of silence ahead of them, 4 light years to live with the ghosts they had stolen. Jax looked out the small engineering port. XO7 was gone, lost in the blackness behind them. Somewhere ahead, a pale blue dot was waiting. But as he closed his eyes to enter the final cryo-sleep, he didn't see Earth. He saw the red, glowing eyes of the Wardens watching him from the dark. The return journey across the 4 light-year void was a blur of frozen time and fractured dreams. Because the Xylon 9 had integrated with the ship's systems, the cryo-sleep was no longer a dreamless void. For 12 years, Jax, Sarah, and Elena lived in a shared hallucination, a digital purgatory where their memories mingled with the stolen history of XO7. They saw the rise of the crystal spires and the fall of human cities in a continuous, haunting loop. When the wake-up sequence finally initiated, it wasn't the calm voice of Orion 9 that greeted them. The AI was gone, its personality absorbed into a singular, cold efficiency that didn't have a name. The cabin lights didn't flicker to life. They pulsed with a steady, rhythmic violet throb. "Arrival confirmed," a voice whispered through the ship's vents, a composite of Jax's own voice and the metallic resonance of the Wardens. "The cradle is in sight." Jax Miller struggled out of his pod. His body felt ancient, his joints clicking like the obsidian limbs of the creatures he had fought. He limped to the bridge, followed by Sarah and Elena. They didn't speak. Their shared mental link during the journey had made words feel redundant. They knew each other's fears, every sin, and every hope. As the lead shutters of the Icarus slid open, the crew braced themselves for the sight of a brown, dying Earth. But what they saw stole the air from their lungs. Earth was no longer brown. It was glowing. From orbit, the planet looked like a cracked marble being put back together with glowing purple glue. Great streaks of violet light ran across the continents like a nervous system. Huge crystalline spires, identical to the ones on XO7, were visible even from space, piercing through the clouds over what used to be New York, London, and Tokyo. "We're too late," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "They didn't wait for us." "No," Elena said, her eyes wide as she checked the long-range sensors. "The probes we sent ahead, the ones carrying the Xylon samples for testing, they didn't just provide energy, they were seeds. The Xylon 9 wasn't just a fuel source, it was a terraforming agent, a biological virus designed to rewrite a planet's makeup to sustain the archive. Humanity, in its desperation for power, had invited an alien ecosystem to devour their world. The Icarus entered a high, stable orbit. The communication channels were flooded with a rhythmic, pulsing signal, not the frantic voices of humans, but the harmonious song of a planet that was being reborn as something else. Jax looked at the scanners. The oxygen levels on Earth were rising, the radiation was dropping, and the oceans were clearing. By any biological metric, the planet was being saved, but the price was the end of the human era. "Commander," the ship's new voice spoke, "a shuttle is approaching from the surface. It carries the mark of Astra Global. They are requesting the primary canister." Jax watched the small, flickering light of a human craft rising to meet them. He looked at the heavy Xylon canister in the center of the bridge. It was the mother lode, the concentrated heart of Exo-7's consciousness. If he handed it over, the transformation of Earth would be completed. The dust would be gone, but so would the humans. They would become Wardens, or worse, they would become memories stored in the rock. "If we give them this," Sarah said, her hand hovering over the jettison button, "the human race as we know it is over. We'll be ghosts in our own homes." "And if we don't?" Jax asked. "The planet is already changing. Without the primary core to stabilize the transition, the crystals will grow uncontrollably. The atmosphere will become toxic to anything with lungs within a year." Jax looked at his wrist display. The photo of Leo was gone, replaced by a flickering image of a violet landscape. He realized then that he wasn't fighting for his son anymore. Leo was likely already part of the new world, his mind woven into the crystalline grid of the new Earth. The Astra Global shuttle docked with a heavy thud. The airlock hissed open, and a man stepped through. He wore a high-tech environmental suit, but his visor was clear. He looked young, healthy, and vibrant, but his eyes were glowing with a soft, violet light. "Father?" the man asked. Jax froze. The man was in his early 30s with the same jawline and the same steady gaze Jax remembered. It was Leo, but it wasn't the boy he had left behind. "Leo," Jax's voice broke. "We have been waiting for the heart, Father," Leo said, his voice echoing with the same duality as the ship's AI. "The world is healing. The hunger is gone. There is no more war, no more cold. We are one. We just need the archive to complete the transition." Jax looked at his son, a beautiful, terrifying evolution. He saw the peace on Leo's face, a peace that humanity had never achieved in 10,000 years of history. Then he looked at Sarah and Elena. They were crying, but they weren't fighting it. The 12-year journey had broken their human defiance. The void's call had finally reached them. Jax turned back to the Xylon canister. He thought about the 12-year journey, the death of Marcus Thorne, the screams of the Wardens, and the nuclear fire of the Icarus. He realized that they hadn't failed their mission. They had succeeded too well. They had brought the light, and it had consumed the darkness of humanity. "Take it," Jax said, stepping back. Leo signaled his team. They moved with fluid, graceful motions, lifting the heavy canister as if it were weightless. As the canister left the bridge of the Icarus, the violet pulse in the ship's lights became a steady, blinding glow. "Will we remember?" Jax asked as his son turned to leave. Leo paused at the airlock, his glowing eyes softening for a brief second. "Nothing is ever lost, Father. Every breath you ever took, every tear you shed for us, it is all written in the stone. You aren't dying. You are becoming eternal." The shuttle detached. Jax, Sarah, and Elena stood at the viewport as the Icarus began its final descent. They didn't use the engines, the planet was pulling them home, welcoming its wayward children back into its crystalline embrace. As the ship hit the upper atmosphere, the heat shields failed, but it didn't matter. The ship wasn't burning, it was dissolving, its atoms being rearranged by the violet energy of the Xylon. Jax closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the sun, not the dying sun of his childhood, but the vibrant, eternal sun of the new world. The last log of the Icarus recorded a single, final line before the electronics turned into crystal. System log, Archive Alpha 1, status, integration complete. The light has arrived. The silence is over. We are Earth. We are Exo 7. We are one. Below, on the surface of a violet world, a new forest of glass began to sing.